This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is the day after Liberation Day, and if, like me, you decided to suspend your real world and listen to Donald Trump last night at 9 o'clock or whatever time it was, whatever part of the world you listened to, you will have been treated to a display, John, which was a combination, I would say. It was half Julius Caesar, half Mattress Mick. Okay?
It was a word salad.
It was a word salad. And what I loved was eventually when they actually produced the very high-tech tariffs, it was a board the likes of which you'd see at the Galway races at the Tote or something. Right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
All you wanted was a little bit of chalk.
Yeah.
So just top line for listeners, I tweeted out last night, it'll be grand. I meant that in the sense that this is a lot less bad than it could have been. And John and I were talking off air just there. We were talking about the notion of anchoring and selling, where you actually say to somebody, the house is worth €500,000, even though you know it's only worth 300 grand. You say it's worth 500,000, but for you, my friend, I'll give it to you for 400 grand. And you think if you actually believe the first opener, which is the anchor price, that you're getting a good deal. It's the way in which your mind works. If you like all that stuff, you should read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is about the slow part of our brain and the fast part of our brain. But anchoring's all about the fast bit, that you actually digest the first piece of news. So against that background, there was a profound fear that the tariffs would be A, not reciprocal, which I'll explain in a second, and B, would be much more definitive.
Yeah.
My own sense is that these will be negotiated. They'll be chipped away. I would say, as a first thought, the European Union will not react straight away, will not actually hit them with counter tariffs. I think the European Union's approach now, and this is for our Irish listeners, our British listeners have been rewarded for Brexit and all sorts of good things by being given only a 10% tariff, which has got profound implications if you're living on the border of Northern Ireland. And again, for the northern businesses, people who are doing business in Northern Ireland, hoping to do business with the United States, you are now going to be paying half the tariff if you are based in Newry than if you are based in Dundalk, if you are based in Derry, than if you are being based in, let us say, Letterkenny. So it is not a bad night, morning, afternoon for Northern Irish business. Back to the big thing, John. The big deal here is that as a result of anchoring, as a result of the way in which we were all positioned, we thought it was going to be worse than it is.
But essentially, it was just whatever tariffs they believe that are being imposed on them, they've just halved it.
So no, that's what reciprocal tariffs mean. So basically the idea is the Americans are saying, look, the world has been unfair to us. They have put up all sorts of trade and non-trade barriers to American goods, which have argued against American goods selling abroad, particularly manufacturers, motorbikes, all those things that he name checked. And what we're going to do is we're going to be hyper generous and we're going to pull a figure more or less out of our arse and then half it, which is exactly what they've done. And of course, what we saw was that the Secretary of State for Commerce produced the board, which, as we said, looked like a board at the Galway races, what looked like notional figures that have no real basis. He claimed the United States as being affected by a 39%, I think, tariff from Europe. That makes no sense from where I'm sitting. What he has done is he has conflated. There are very few, it's on average about 2% tariff between Europe and the United States, but there are significant non-trade barriers on American agriculture. The reason the Europeans give is that we are doing this for health grounds. I don't believe that, frankly. I think the European Union has been very protectionist when it comes to agriculture. I think the Americans are right.
Yeah, but I don't want to be eating American bleached chicken.
You might not want to be eating American bleached chicken, but my point is that the European Union in agriculture has been a hyper trade protectionist.
Yeah.
Because it has been driven by our own farmers over years. And it's led to the situation where food prices are much higher in Europe than there are anywhere else in the world, which has benefited farmers in the main, but it's actually a tax on European consumers, particularly poor ones. So in a way, the Yanks are kind of right there. But in fact, the European tariff in agriculture It's very, very difficult to put a figure on it because it's, as you say, non-trade. It's kind of health basis, and we can't have this because of
Yeah.
this type of projection. There's also the Americans have used VAT as a tariff.
I was going to ask you about that, actually. I mean, they have a sales tax, which is pretty much the same thing, albeit slightly lower, I would say. But we have VAT on everything,
So
our own goods included.
yes, so I mean, it's nothing against the Americans, but they've decided that because VAT is a tax on consumption,
Yeah.
and it is a tax on any sort of consumption, right? So it's whether it's a business expense or whether it's a business or whether it's consumers or whatever. They've decided, okay, this is definitely an anti-American tax, even though it's not. It's just
Yeah.
a way of broadening your tax base so you don't overburden income tax with everything, or you don't overburden other forms of tax. But be that as it may, the Americans have said, look, on average, European VAT is around 22%. On average, American sales tax can vary between about 5 in the lower tax states and about 9 or 10 in the higher ones. So on average, they're looking at about 6 or 7. So they're saying you are taxing us 15% more than you should be, or even more than that. And we take that as a tariff, complicit tax. So they've kind of they've added lots of things together.
But they seem to be distorting an awful lot of figures. And, like in true Trump style, like a lot of stuff was made up. There were some barefaced lies there.
Okay, so later on in a few minutes, the podcast is going to have a lovely chat with Jeff Goldberg,
Yeah.
who listeners will know is the man who should not have been on the Signal chat.
Yeah.
And we're going to ask Jeff what he learned about the Trump administration from the last week in his own sense. So it'll be interesting. And of course, what comes out of it is a lack of seriousness. That's
Yeah.
what Jeff kind of said to us, right? I think that lack of seriousness is basically the thread that will go through this entire podcast.
But is there a logic to this aggressive approach? And if there is, like, what is it?
The Americans do, like if there is a logic in this, the Americans the import bill for America is about $3 trillion of imports. If on average, they are going to have a tax or a tariff on certain countries of, let's say the average tariff is about 25%,
Yeah.
even could be as high as 30%, simply because they lent very hard on the Asians. The Asians are going to pay more tariffs than we are.
The Vietnamese are getting
The
stuffed.
Vietnamese, yeah. But if you look at it, it's a big number. They could raise $700 to $800 billion in revenue. That's a lot when you're trying to close your budget deficit. So there is a logic to it in the very short term revenue side. But the picture that Trump painted last night was what Churchill used to describe as the broad sunlit uplands. So Churchill used to say that the best thing about giving public speeches was you could tell people the terrible things, but as long as you pointed them to the broad sunlit uplands, there's sun on the uplands and we're moving in that direction, people will tend to believe you or go with you.
Yeah.
Trump doesn't like the bad stuff. He just does as you'd say, it's a sort of permanent sun on the uplands, right?
Yeah.
And so he painted a picture of a renaissance of American industry. It was the opposite of his inauguration speech of 8 years ago, which talked about American carnage. He brought up the United Auto Workers Union. That was a massive, big, usually pro-democratic union. He was basically rubbing it in the nose to the Democrats, saying, I'm with the working men. They were suitably equipped in high-vis jackets and baseball hats and the uniform of the Yankee worker. All in all, though, I think as Europeans, we would be well advised to let this one just settle for a while.
And what about Ireland?
In the case of Ireland, Jameson, Kerrygold, these are big brands that will be affected badly. You have places like Mitchelstown, which are producing a lot of butter and they're selling a hell of a lot of butter to the United States. Jameson likewise. So our old, what they call the beer and biscuits economy, the agricultural based economy, that is going to have to deal with the fact that now Irish products are 20% more expensive.
But the big fear was pharma. Where's that at, do you think?
Well, you see, the thing is, I think multinationals can wear this a lot. Multinationals, and basically Jameson and of course Kerrygold are multinationals. The American multinationals can wear this. It's a 24% hit. It means that the product coming from Ireland is going to be more expensive. It means that if people will swap farmers, if there's actually substitute goods, they can swap straight away from American-made farmer vis-a-vis Irish-made farmer. That's not the way that pharma works. We talked about elasticities a couple of weeks ago, John.
Yeah.
We talked about, if you are getting stents from, for example, or any sort of heart medicine from Boston Scientific, which is very cardiovascular sort of pharma company, you will just pay the extra because it's life threatening. So that's because pharmaceuticals are in general what they call price inelastic. People don't respond to prices, which
Mm.
is why pharmaceutical drugs are very expensive here because
Yeah.
people need them.
Yeah.
So in
Yeah.
fact, that's why there's a huge amount of state control over what pharma can and cannot be, because they are price inelastic. They kind of are non-economic in the way in which people react to them, simply because you need the drugs. But be that as it may, he did say, if you're a company, you want to avoid the tariffs, come back and make the stuff in America. So that'll obviously percolate through the boardroom. If you're sitting in the boardroom of Pfizer or, Eli Lilly, you're thinking, okay, fair enough. We've got these very successful factories in Ireland. They make lots and lots of stuff. We make lots and lots of profit. Our shareholders are very, very happy. We've got all the network here, etc. It's a toehold in Europe. We can export to Europe. But maybe we will put some of that produce in our fab in North Carolina or Michigan
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's very hard to move a pharma industry. So I think there will be a lot of people, even in Irish pharmaceutical circles, saying, we kind of dodged a bullet there. That's the first thing. Second thing, he didn't mention anything about what the Americans go on about, which is the tax scam, which is rediverting the money that is made in America, but actually having it paid tax in Ireland. They didn't mention that at all. Does that mean they're going to
Well,
mention it again?
yeah.
I'm not
For
too
now.
sure, but
Yeah.
it was
That could be
certainly,
round 2.
well, yeah, it could be round 2, but Liberation Day was his stall that he was setting out of what was he's going to do for the next 4 years and his dream for
Mm.
America and his vision for America. I think, you know what? It's like Y2K. It'll be a damn squib, right? It's the
Yeah.
Y2K of economics, right? And I think we can move on. Not that it's going to not have any difference. Of course it will. But I think the collective fears that were brought up largely, like as I said at the top, by anchoring, they haven't really come to pass. So I
Yeah.
think there'll be a lot of like, "Phew, okay, let's move on,
Yeah.
And it is a tax. It has been greater than it was. It would be better if it was free trade. But you know what? It's not real barriers in the sense of barriers that it could have been. If you were Vietnamese, I think you'd be feeling a lot more miffed now because the tariffs on the Vietnamese are, I think, 45%. That's a huge,
Yeah.
huge tariff on a rapidly growing economy.
I think one of the reasons why he hit Vietnam so hard as well was because China has been diverting an awful lot of their
Yeah, I think you're
exports
right.
through
Yeah, you're right.
Vietnam to America.
Yeah,
So
yeah, no, you're right. On the Europeans, he kind of said, we like the Europeans. They're very tough. But he didn't actually pull the trigger on
yeah,
significant moves against us. And you know what, John? This will all be negotiated down. It might not necessarily be played out in a hockey match as it was between America and Canada, but I think there's plenty of
Mm.
scope and there's plenty of time for moving down. I'd be very surprised if the European Union, via the European Commission, reacted rapidly
yeah,
and immediately against this. I think it's like, okay, let's just
yeah.
relax for a while and let's go back to basics and see, can we negotiate with the Americans?
Yeah, but Trump has shown himself to be kind of fickle when it comes to decisions on tariffs and when it comes to his allies. So can we take him seriously when it comes to negotiations? I mean, like, take Canada. 1 minute the tariffs are on, then they were off, and then they're on. The same with Mexico. Can we take him seriously?
So, John, I think we're actually back to, you put your finger on it, it's this lack of seriousness, right? We're about to talk to Jeff Goldberg, he who shouldn't have been on the infamous Signal Group, where J.D. Vance signaled his dislike of Europe. In fact, the word pathetic was used again by Donald Trump with respect to the European Union
Yeah,
tonight.
yeah,
We talked to Jeff earlier on, and one of the takeaways of the conversation one of the takeaways of the conversation, which is coming up now, is that very lack of seriousness. Like you make stuff up, you hope to get away with
Yeah.
it. If you don't get away with it, you double down on it. You attack anybody who's skeptical or quizzical of your numbers or your facts or your ideology, and you move on. So I think you're exactly right. It's exactly the same thing. And actually, with that in mind, let's go to the conversation with Jeff. For those of you who came across his name last week, Jeff Goldberg is a very fine, fine journalist. He's the editor in chief of The Atlantic magazine, which is my favorite American publication. I haven't missed it for years and years and years. And I really believe that if you're into American politics, American culture, American society, and the American perception of what's going on in the world, The Atlantic is a great monthly read. It really is a wonderful magazine. And I am delighted that we will have a special discount of $20 off your annual subscription to The Atlantic. And we're going to give you the details after this conversation with Jeff Goldberg, which is coming up right now.
Jeffrey Goldberg has joined the group chat.
Oh,
Welcome, Jeffrey Goldberg. How are you?
I'm
now
fine. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you. How's everything at home? How's Pamela dealing with the living with the most wanted or man in the MAGA movement?
The sexiest man, I think, is what you're trying to. It's hard. It's hard to live with such a sexy man. Well, your wife knows. Sean knows.
Anyway, listen, Jeff, it's good to see you. You've had a roller coaster of a week. I'm going to talk you through a few things, but tell me again what exactly happened here, because we woke up the other day and people were aghast, and our own WhatsApp groups were saying, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" What exactly happened?
It's things that don't usually happen. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, more than a couple of weeks ago now, I got a message request from somebody purporting to be Michael Waltz, the national security advisor to the president. I accepted it. I know him a little bit. Didn't surprise me that much. Forgot about it. A couple of days later, I'm added by Michael Waltz into a Signal chat group called the PC Houthi chat group, or Houthi PC chat group. PC stands for Principals Committee, the main cabinet members, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, so on. I, of course, think it's a scam, and so do my colleagues, because, one of my colleagues was very funny about this. Somebody who covers intelligence agencies full time said, it has to be a disinformation operation or a foreign agency, foreign intelligence agency entrapment campaign or something, because the surface explanation is too stupid to be believed. Like the most
Yeah,
improbable explanation. I
absolutely.
mean, of course,
Yeah.
the most improbable explanation turns out to be the explanation, but we really didn't believe it. I didn't engage in the group at all because I wanted to see what was going on here. I mean, a small part of me thought, yeah, maybe these guys added
They
me to
screwed
the
up.
Signal chat. As weird as that may be, but mostly I was just very paranoid and suspicious about, who was trying to screw with me.
Can I just stop you there before you have beef with Trump?
Oh,
You
Trump
have
has beef with me.
right.
I
And the
have no,
last
I'm fair and balanced, as you know.
okay, all right, of course. But I mean, the second last time we spoke, you sent me a text about Trump calling you out at some. I was just saying the last time you spoke, you were interviewing the Fonz, which was quite different to being on
Yeah,
the Signal
yeah.
group.
Love the Fonz. We all love the Fonz. Great time in Dalkey with the
Hey.
Fonz.
Exactly. So listen, come back to me. So you thought, okay, could just be dumb enough that I'm actually on something real here.
Yeah. But by the way, you make an interesting, you raise an interesting issue. It's like, yes, I've reported some tough things about them, and Donald Trump says all kinds of mean words. But, part of Trumpism is performance, right?
Yep.
I've always described him as smaller than life in a kind of way. When you meet him in person, he's just, "Oh, hi, how are you? Nice to meet. Oh, you're from Ireland. Isn't that nice? I have friends in Ireland." And you'd be, huh, like the big fire-breathing dragon is just this guy in a suit, and he's like asking you, "Oh, so do you have kids? That's nice. How old are they?" And you're sort of like, "Hmm." This
Yeah.
the most ferocious figure on the planet. So, yeah, there's beef, but there's also, these relationships are complicated. Anyway, your question was what happened next?
So the question is, so you think, okay, there's a bit of you thinks, wait a second, this is clearly a mistake, and or it's a setup, or it's a foreign agent, but there's a tiny part of me says, it just could be serendipity, and I could be onto something here.
Yeah, but the level of serendipity there is, that's lottery level
Yeah.
serendipity. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it makes no sense. And of course, you're a very prominent journalist. The Atlantic has been a thorn in the side of the MAGA movement. So, have you got any closer to understanding what actually happened before we
No.
talk about the message?
No, I mean, look, the most obvious explanation is often the truth, right? My phone number is in his phone, and either he or his assistant putting together the chat group meant to type in somebody else. They typed me. They didn't look, right? They didn't
Yep.
see it. I mean, the funny thing is like nobody noticed when I was added, and also nobody noticed when I left. But I mean, if there's one lesson here,
How does that make you feel?
yeah, right. Know who's in your chat group for God's sake. Like
Yeah.
before you start
Yeah. End of
before you start
story.
popping off on great issues, it's like I wonder who's listening here.
Yeah.
It's like this is just real. This is really ultimately not a story about war and democracy and spies. It's really a story about digital hygiene.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, listen, on the basis that we are digitally hygienic, or we believe we are, let's talk about the war, the spies, the angle. So the conversation starts, you're thinking, okay, if this is possible, this is huge.
Yeah, but again, like I said, until there was sort of a fateful day in which Pete Hegseth, or let's call it this way. In my mind, I thought of him, the character playing Pete Hegseth, or the AI bot representing Pete Hegseth in this manufactured weird chat, starts putting out sort of the attack plan, the strike plan for bombing Houthi targets in Yemen. Obviously, when I saw that text, and he gave the times, right? He
Yeah.
said, like, "The bombs are gonna start falling in 2 hours and then 3 hours over here," and so on. I thought, "Well, alright. All I have to do now is just wait." I mean, if still seemed like a kind of a weird simulation or a weird
Hmm.
scam, but I was like,
Hmm.
"Alright, if they're, like, going after the Houthis, we're gonna hear about it." And then sure enough, they attacked these Houthi targets. I mean, they discussed in the chat and they discussed publicly later what happened. They killed apparently the chief missile maker or chief missile officer of the Houthis, and according to the Houthis, at least killed a bunch of civilians who were around that scenario. But obviously, bombs were falling in Yemen precisely when the character playing Pete Hegseth said they would fall. So I was like, all right, now I'm in another
Yeah.
now I'm in another situation. Now I'm in a bad movie
Yeah.
or
And
maybe a
you're,
good movie, but, I was talking to a screenwriter friends yesterday at another thing, and I said that, this one, if you guys had, like, come up with this one, we in my profession would have been like, "No, that's not realistic. Come on."
I was about to say, if the journalism goes south, you can always play yourself because it is movie like Carry On. So let us go into what all this means. So you're on a WhatsApp group. You shouldn't be on the group chat. You are on the group chat. The bombs go off. Then subsequently you realize, oh my God, this is true. I've actually had be privy to all sorts of information. What does all
Yeah.
this mean for American security, for the level of American spying, for the military integrity, all that stuff?
Well, it doesn't mean good things if the people in charge of the most powerful military in the history of the world don't take it very seriously. I'm not just talking about, the emojis that they used afterward, which was kind of like, "Oh my god, stop using emojis, please, like, you're grown-ups." I mean, I use emojis, you use emojis, but it's usually like, as jokes, not about military action that results in the death of people. And by the way, I'm not I like the Houthis about as much as Pete Hegseth likes the Houthis, any group that has as its slogan, "Death to America," "A curse on the Jews," etcetera. It's like, I fall into all their
Yeah,
categories. I'm
yeah,
not like
yes.
I got nothing for the Houthis here, but it's like when you're engaged in I'm sorry, I was thinking about these emojis that they use, like the fist emoji and the fire emoji afterward. And
Yeah.
it's like, guys, this is life and death stuff. Like, you don't like after D-Day, it's like if Eisenhower had a phone, he wouldn't have like texted back to FDR, fist
Yeah, yeah,
emoji and like, ooh,
yeah. Way
it
to
would have
go,
been like
FDR. Way to
you
go. Yeah,
you
yeah.
have to be grave about this stuff because you are taking people's lives and you are not only taking people's lives, you're risking your own people's lives. But in any case, what it says is that to me, there's a little bit of cosplay here, right? It's a little bit of Pete Hegseth acting like he's the Secretary of Defense. The only problem with that is he is the Secretary of Defense. Like,
Exactly.
and
And
take this role ser I mean, the obvious problem here is they should not have been, and I don't have to go into the complications of American law on this, but they should not have been using a commercial app to communicate this level of sensitive information. Obviously, they had no operational security whatsoever. I mean, it's axiomatically true that they were reckless and negligent in their operational security because I was on the chat.
exactly.
Like
Exactly.
they're arguing, it doesn't matter, it doesn't this, that, and the other thing. It's like somebody added the editor in chief of the Atlantic to the chat. That's like
Mhm.
literally insane thing to do. I mean, I'm happy, like, if they wanna add me to all their chats, I'd love to hear their arguments and go back and forth. But, from a security standpoint, it's like, you know what it is? The word that comes to mind is unserious. It's just
Yes.
Mm.
unserious behavior.
Taking transparency to a new level.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
that's the
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It's like,
exactly.
"Well,
Yeah.
you said you wanted to know what we're doing, so here we
Yeah.
are." But,
There we go.
they're these are the same guys who say that we can't discuss flights to El Salvador in which we're putting, illegal immigrants on because it's national security, and we can't tell you when it's gonna happen. I recognize that that's sensitive and obviously extremely controversial, but it's not as sensitive as, like, actually sending American pilots into a part of the world where there's anti-aircraft capabilities that wanna shoot down the American pilots. It's like, who are we kidding here?
And can you tell me, Jeff, what is the reaction? Because I've seen the reaction of them towards you, and I want to talk to that in a second. But what's the reaction of people you know in the military?
Oh.
Serious military people.
Oh, that's interesting. The problem is, and I'm sure this is a universal issue, it's like, if you are high ranking, you get away with stuff. Put it this way, in the US State Department and embassies around the world, at night, security officers go through offices and they look for classified documents on people's desks. If you have left out a classified something stamped classified or secret or whatever, if you have left it on your desk, you can be punished to the point of being fired, right? You have to put it in a safe and you have to take care
Hmm.
of, and you have to have, good security hygiene. And so, a lot of people in the intelligence community and the State Department and the military, and you see this in Reddit chats and you see this all over the place, are sort of like saying to themselves, well, if I had done that, I'd not only be fired, I'd be court-martialed or I'd be prosecuted for mishandling sensitive information. So, look, as a leadership story, this is very troubling because there's no accountability. There's no consequences when the powerful people do it.
Well, this is precisely where I want to go. What does it tell us about inside the brain of the White House at the moment?
The brain look, the
I'm asking
reaction of
for a friend, by the way.
Yeah, the reaction of the White House was very interesting. At first, they actually did confirm to us that it was a real signal chat, and they said, and it's somebody unauthorized, me, was included, and they're looking into it. It was sort of a normal statement that you would expect the government to make. But then this is a White House that the tone is obviously set from the very top. Donald Trump, who learned this from Roy Cohn, his original lawyer, the McCarthyite lawyer.
Mm.
Hmm.
You never apologize. You never explain. You never cede any point. You deny and you attack and you attack and you attack. So they started attacking me pretty relentlessly as a sleazebag and a scumbag and a this and a that, all kinds of bags, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
and
I think a
and
bottom scum was another particular
bottom
one.
scum of
Bottom scum.
journalism,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which is pretty low in journalism, right?
I
Um,
was about to
yeah,
say.
I mean that's so there was that level, and it was sort of like I was curious about it. I'm impervious to this stuff, I don't care, but I was curious about it because I literally had done nothing. I just opened my phone. Stephen
Yeah.
Colbert had the late night talk show, the host, the comedian,
Yeah.
had a great riff on this. It's like, if he's so bad, why did you put him in the chat? Like, why is he in your
Exactly.
phone? Why, I mean, it was sort of fun. I enjoyed it because it was, it got very succinctly at the problem. So they deny and they attack, and they have just one play. It's not flexible, it's not supple, it's not plastic, it's not situations based. It's just attack, 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 and hope some of the attacks stick. The attacks didn't really stick in this case because the fact set was
Mm.
so extraordinarily dumb. It's like and everybody understands it's a very relatable scandal, right? Because everybody's like, I can't believe, David McWilliams is coming to dinner tonight. I don't wanna be
That
with that
schmuck.
guy." And it's like,
I
"Oops,
don't want to see him
sorry.
sign.
I sent that to David. Jesus, I didn't mean that, David. I'm in a bad mo"
Yeah,
everybody's
it's
done
another
like
David
a
McWilliams. Yeah, exactly.
everybody yeah, like, I don't want that McWilliams with us. But everybody's done something on it's just you've never sent an errant text about the bombing of Yemen. So it's been very relatable and people understand it and they understand that it's just a screw up. It's a terrible screw up, but it's a screw up. And the way you get out of these things in a day or two is to say, well, what you do is you give the media and you give the public no place to go, right? So what you do in ordinary circumstances is you say, "Well, when we make a mistake, it's a real doozy. We made a terrible mistake, and we're going to investigate it. There'll be consequences to the people who did it, and we're going to learn from the mistakes, and we're not going to be on signal, and we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do that." And then you give the media nowhere else to go by just saying it plainly, and then you know obviously your political enemies will still make hay out of it, but most people react by saying, "Oh, good, taking responsibility. That's what leaders do." But these guys only have one move. The move works because often they can bully and intimidate people into acquiescence or into silence. But in this case, it doesn't work. So that's where we are. That's why we're still talking about it a week
That's why we're
later.
still talking about it. Yeah, because it's going on.
They could have just left it. They could have just moved along, but it's not the nature of this White House.
Can I ask you, Jeff, in all that attacks that you suffered, they also defamed you. Would you consider suing for defamation?
I'm a journalist, and I don't sort of. I mean, what do they defame me? You're a sleazebag. Well, no, I'm not. What's the like?
Yeah,
What am I going to do? Go into court and say, "Here is proof that I'm not
yeah,
sleazy." I don't even know. I mean, I would never say never to anything, but that's just dumb to close out options. But my predisposition is to just let them look silly and let
yeah,
them look
yeah.
stupid. I'm not gonna convince people who wanna believe that somehow I'm a scumbag, they're not gonna, like, say, "Oh, now that he's won a lawsuit against them." I don't know. This is not no offense to Europe, but, like, in Europe, you have you know, lot more rigorous guidelines for what you can and cannot say in society, and I kinda just, like my view is like, "Alright, call me whatever you want. I don't care."
Mm,
Jeff, I'm glad you talk about Europe because for Europeans, there's all the Trump stuff, there's the leadership stuff, there's the American security, but there's also the tone of the anti-European rhetoric on the chat group
Yeah,
of
that's
JD
important.
Vance. It's really important, and I wanted to take you there because I think that for Europeans was the confirmation. We've seen it at Munich. We saw it with Zelensky. We see it with Vance saying that basically the problem is Europe internally. It's the problem. I'm not afraid of Russia. I'm not afraid of China, etc. What does that tell us about what the top brass think of this continent and the
Well,
European Union?
on the one hand, there's no secret. JD Vance went to the Munich Security Conference and basically told you all to, blow off. I'm not cursing because I forgot what the rules are on your podcast. Do you have
They are
rules?
very liberal.
oh
They're
no,
All right.
unhygienic.
we
Unhygienic
encourage
at
it.
the
We
extreme.
encourage
Yes,
it.
exactly. In fact,
You know, I mean,
if you don't swear, we're not going to publish it.
well, JD Vance told you all to fuck off, and
Exactly. Okay.
so there's no secret there. But the depth of it, like this was, I think what in Europe, some of the coverage that I saw and some of the conversations I had, I think people were a little bit they took it as a revelation because here they are perfectly privately, or they think they're just talking to themselves,
Yeah.
and they're still railing against Europe. They're still going, "The Europeans are pathetic, and the Europeans are this." I mean, look, this is too big a subject for a 20-minute or 30-minute podcast episode, but, for whatever reason, we're living in a Twilight Zone episode now in which the leaders of the United States of America feel closer to Russia than they do to our historic allies, Germany, France, England, so on, UK. and feel more kinship to authoritarians like Viktor Orban, Xi Jinping, even than they do to the democratically elected leaders of Western Europe. I mean, sometimes things are so big you can't see them. It's there's some analogy here that I'm
Hmm.
not, it's the old, the blind man with the elephant. You can't figure out, what it is. The story is so big and we're so close to it that we don't understand that this is world historical in importance. Because for 80 years, literally 80 years, we're in, 80 years from 1945, we've had a very, very stable relationship with Western Europe. We're on your team. We're on Team Democracy. We're anti Soviet and then anti Russia, or like wary of Russia. We're going to defend the small peoples of Europe against aggression. Same thing holds true for Asia and China and the relationship there. And now all of a sudden, we seem to have switched sides, or it feels as if we're switching sides, I should say.
I mean, it really does. It really does. And there's no more evidence of that than what is going on right now with tariffs.
Yeah.
So America's enemies, China, are being treated better, or historic enemies or ostensible enemies are being treated better than Americans' allies, France, Germany, Ireland. I'm not sure about the UK, where that'll fall. Is it all of one piece? Is this part of this massive culture war that they believe that we are in some way delinquent, degenerate, backward looking, whatever?
Look, it's a contempt for, if you're Donald Trump, I think you have a certain contempt for people who engage in self restraint, right? Self restraint is a prerequisite for participation in a democracy. You don't get to do everything you want to do. There's oversight. You have to restrain even if you have freedom of speech, you have to restrain your tongue. You can't just call everybody names just because you're mad at them. He sees that, what I would call mature self restraint, as a sign of weakness. He likes the strong men. Xi Jinping kills a bunch of people and is like, "Oh, wow, that's what you do." Putin walks around without a shirt, and Viktor Orban tells people to go fuck off, and he admires this. So there's just, and basically, look, we know this in the world. There is an authoritarian impulse. Some people are more predisposed to having an authoritarian impulse. And in Donald Trump, I think it's fair to say that he has an authoritarian impulse. The lessons of living in a democracy don't seem to have penetrated him, his consciousness in a deep way. So that's what you're in Europe facing. Yes, look, Americans have good reason to be upset with Europe. You don't spend enough on your own defense. We have to spend more than traditionally. We've spent disproportionate. You're sloppy on immigration. You don't deal with your problems and your challenges. You can make a list. It's all in the course of, any relationship is going to have its complications. We always said, even Barack Obama was frustrated with Western Europe for not spending enough on its own defense, and he would tell them. But he also knew that just because I'm upset with France right now doesn't mean doesn't mean I'm gonna go become friends with Russia. Like,
Yeah,
it's just like
exactly.
it's a kind of schizophrenic. Everything's extreme. Everything's just extreme, and like it's the extremes versus the people who see the complicated middle.
So you, through no fault of your own, get on a signal group. Suddenly
Yeah.
you're public enemy number one because you've exposed a sloppiness at the very heart. Rather than say, as you said, look, fess up, we made a mess of this, we'll get to the bottom of it. They dumb down, they say, you are the problem. And it's
Yeah.
all about winning and losing.
Yeah.
And now that we're facing tariffs, not just Ireland, but Ireland is really out in a limb here, but the rest of Europe, right? The end game for people that we've just described is not a compromise at
No.
the end. That's my fear. That
You're
what
gonna be
happens to
bullied
you,
until you just stop being bullied.
that's my point. Like, do we then have to stand up and say, okay, we got a trade war. You want it, you can have it. We're not small, we're rich, we have very good companies. We run a massive surplus with you guys, which is the crux of the issue. And the reason we run a surplus,
Are you talking about Europe or Ireland in particular?
Europe in general, but then Ireland
Yeah.
in particular.
Look,
The
here's the
Europe in
thing.
general can stand up.
Here's the
Ireland
thing.
can't.
Here's the thing. Bullies press their advantage until they run into something that pushes back, right? So
Yeah.
here's the thing. You are going to I'll use the example. I don't know if you're following this, but he's obviously waging a war against the universities in America. Columbia is right in and
Yes.
they're always trying to figure out, okay, we'll do more against anti-Semitism. Fine, you should do that anyway. And we'll give you this and give you that and give you this and give you that. It's like, here's the thing. They're going to, let's use Ireland in this example. They're going to hurt you until you just say, I don't give a shit anymore. Bring what you got and we'll just stand up for our principles. Like, this is what I say about the universities and the law firms and everything that's going on here. It's like, stand up for your principles. You might suffer economically. Columbia is definitely going to lose some money from the Trump administration. Stand up against anti-Semitism, which is the right thing to do. Stand up against Trump bullying, because it's the right thing to do. People are going to be mad at you. You're going to lose money. But at the end of the day, you have your soul. At the end of the day, you preserve your own soul. And for a country like Ireland, you may lose some revenue. Here's the thing, though. No one's going to starve to death in Ireland because of the Trump tariffs. At a certain point, a smart Irish politician is going to say, fuck me, fuck you. By the way,
Mhm.
everybody around the world is gonna be like, "Oh, look at Ireland. Oh, look at those guys." And it's gonna be like, we're not gonna be blackmailed, we're not gonna be extorted, we're not gonna get bullied. You don't wanna do business with us? Fine. We're a talented group of people. We'll find a way to make money. You know, you might suffer, right? You might suffer. You might suffer loss in revenue. Taxes might go up. But I actually think that an Irish politician, I'm just free speculating here, but an
Yeah,
Irish
no,
politician
absolutely.
or any politician who says to the bully, "You know what? Go fuck yourself." I think the temporary spike in prices or whatever it is that you're going to suffer.
Are downgraded in
Yeah,
tax revenue or whatever the
like,
issue is. Yeah.
here's the thing, like, let me just say this. Donald Trump has created something that no one in history has ever, he's remarkably talented, created something that no one in history has ever created before. Canadian nationalism, right?
You're
Right?
absolutely right.
Canadians are
Yeah.
like now like, fuck these guys. I mean, it's like Greenland is like gonna go buy guns. And it's like there's a certain advantage to, like, if you're being bullied, your citizens admire you when you stand up for your principles and when you stand up for what you think is right. And so, like, you're coming, yeah, you're the cannon might be pointing in your direction sooner or later, but, like, giving in just doesn't, cutting side deals doesn't work. It just means that, you know what Donald Trump always said about politicians? He had no respect for politicians because he's like, you could buy these guys with a steak dinner. Like, they don't
Mhm.
really have principles.
And if Donald Trump is telling you you don't have principles, then you
Yeah,
know
no, but
you
this is
don't have
like, look,
principles.
he's a kind of an animal genius. He understands weakness. He's a predator. He understands weakness. You don't go for the strong wildebeest at the front of the herd. You go for the weak wildebeest who's trailing behind. And that's when the pack of hyenas jumps. It's sort of this is the lesson. I think there's a lesson in journalism, the lesson I took, obviously, when I'm dealing with this, when they're pushing on me and I'm like, "Nah, I'm not playing this game." Just stand up for what's true and what you think is right and suffer the consequences. But at the end of the day, you'll feel better about yourself, if nothing else.
Jeff, we will leave it there. By the way, we are doing a special Atlantic and David McWilliams podcast promo because Shan's mother was given the Atlantic for Christmas as her present a couple of years ago. She's an
Not
absolute
even by me.
aficionado, not even
Who
by you, by us, by the
Oh,
family.
amazing.
Because she's sitting up in Belfast on her own and she's saying, what's good to read? We gave her this. And I think she absolutely loves it. And I would love to share it with as many of our listeners as possible.
Yeah.
I'm not blowing smoke. It's a great magazine. It's wonderful journalism. It's edited by a great bloke, as you've just heard. And it's a fantastic insight into the United States, but also in the way the Americans see the rest of the world. So we are doing a subscription after this. The details are going to be at the end of the podcast. Jeff, brilliant to see you. I will see you again at some stage, hopefully here or there, and stay out
Here
of
or
trouble.
there. Well, we'll
Thanks,
we'll
Jeff.
we'll be in the resistance together, although I'm not in the resistance, but, if we have to, we'll do it.
See you on the barricades.
Yeah,
Brilliant. All
exactly.
right, Jeff. Listen, great stuff. Talk to you soon.
All right, talk
Cheers,
to you.
man. Give
Thanks.
my love to Pamela.
I will.
Bye.
Back to you guys. Yep.
Jeffrey Goldberg has left the group.
That was fantastic. What an interesting guy. And actually, once we gave him a permission to swear, he did it with
He
gusto.
loved it. He's a great guy. I've met him loads of times. He's a really interesting
Yeah.
journalist, very good thinker about all things American, a good skin in general,
Yeah. And I was going to say, just before we get into it, I'd never heard of Signal before. So it's the best marketing for Signal app ever.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the best marketing for the Atlantic as well.
Yeah, true.
You know, exactly.
But it's interesting that what he was saying is that the Trump administration seems to be so unserious, is the word that keeps coming up.
Yeah, and it's funny because on the one hand, that's what makes it very refreshing for many people. That it's kind of unserious, it's seat of the pants.
Bunch
It
of
isn't the
lads
elite.
kind of getting
You
on
don't
with
have
stuff.
to have gone to Harvard to actually be a member of it.
Yeah.
It is. It's like a lads WhatsApp group. It's like lads in the pub, except Trump doesn't drink. But it's got that sort of casual, sort of chaotic, almost voyeuristic sense of you're watching to see what can go wrong. So that in a way is a sort of a part of the charm that they're selling to the American people, is that we are not the elite. We are not po-faced. Things can go wrong. But of course, you're dealing with very serious issues. And the problem with the non-serious approach to serious issues, John, is it's a thread that's weaving now through everything. Last night was all the same, sort of carry on. It's like, Liberation Day. It's sort of reality TV, and the numbers, we just make them up.
Yeah. And it'll be all about the ratings after this,
Yeah.
But come here, let me ask you one last thing. He harked back to the 1880s and talked about this tariff commission that was set up in the 1880s because there was so much money. We didn't know what to do with it. So we set up a commission. What's the story with that? Was that serious? Did that really happen?
No, it didn't happen. I'll tell you all about it. The reference to the commission on tariffs was before our friend McKinley, who we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. Basically, after the Civil War, the main expenditure of the American government, the new united government of the United States, was pensions for former soldiers and who had disability, and for soldiers' families who were killed in the Civil War. That's why the issue of raising taxes was extremely sensitive, because not raising taxes meant you were basically going to say to the widows and the kids of the men who died in the Civil War, well, you know what? Their fight wasn't worth it. So when Donald Trump says it was all about they had so much money they were going to give it away, it wasn't about that at all. And I remember researching this explicitly for the book. It was all about how do you balance the interests of American agriculture, which wanted exports, because American agriculture was based on what was called the grain invasion. And that was an invasion of grain, cheap grain from America, which went up through the Great Lakes, John, the Erie Canal, down the Hudson River, and out to New York. That's what made New York. What made New York what it is was the export of agriculture, not industrial goods. And so there was a huge movement in the United States in the 1880s for actual free trade. And the tariffs were in order to build up American domestic industry against what was at the time the world-beating industrial power of England and Germany.
Okay.
So ironically, it was kind of flipped on its head.
Yeah.
So, but again, it's spoofology. It wasn't all about money at all.
Yeah. What do you think then ultimately is the main takeaway from this?
Okay, so the main takeaway is the world has shifted. We are now in a trade war. Donald Trump declared war on the world yesterday in economic terms. But given the expectation, there was a lot baked into the price. By that, I mean people had actually digested this. I think now, from a European perspective and members of the European Union, we will now begin the process of the negotiation. This is the opening hand. And now there's a process of negotiation, which Trump, as a real estate guy, fully expects.
Yeah.
He's thrown out the top price. He says, the property's worth $1 million. He knows it's worth $500,000. And now it's the haggle. Now we're into the haggle, the hustle.
Yeah.
And I think we're into the haggle.
Oh, that's the bit he loves as well.
this is the bit he loves, and he
Yeah.
can pick up the phone and talk to people, and he's part of the game. So I would say, look, not as bad as we expected. Life goes on. The economy will not grind to a halt. Is it better than no tariffs at all? Absolutely not. Is it as bad as it could have been? Absolutely not. And we just move on. We just move on to the next issue. And you can be sure there will be a next issue. But in fact, to keep listeners of the podcast up to date, and again, I have no skin in this game at all with the Atlantic, except I am a subscriber and have been for many, many years. There is a $20 discount if you go on for the rest of the month, atlantic.com/DMW pod. If you click on that link, you will get a $20 discount on an annual subscription. Believe me, it's really worth it. And John, we'll talk to you Tuesday.
Yes, indeed.
Rest easy. Rest easy.